Chapter 4: The phenomenological and ideal content of the experiences of meaning. 30. The content of the expressive experience taken in its psychological sense and in the sense of a unified meaning. The essence of meaning is seen by us, not in the meaning-conferring experience, but in its content, the single, self-identical intentional one unity set over against the dispersed multiplicity of actual and possible experiences of speakers and thinkers. The content of a meaning experience, in this ideal sense, is not at all what psychology means by a content, i.e. any real part or side of an experience. If we understand a name, whether standing for what is individual or general, physical or psychic, existent or non-existent, possible or impossible, or if we understand a statement, true in content or false, consistent or absurd, believed or figmentary, then what either expression says, the meaning which forms its logical content and which, in contexts of pure logic, is called either an idea or concept, or a judgment or proposition, is nothing which could, in a real sense, count as part of our act of understanding. This experience naturally has its psychological components, is a content, consists of contents, in the ordinary sense of psychology. Here belong primarily all the sensuous elements of our experience, the appearances of words, in their purely visual, auditory or motor content, and, in the next place, the acts of objective reference which locate such words in space and time. The psychic stuff here involved is well known to be vastly manifold, varying greatly from one individual to the next, and for the same individual from one moment to another, even in respect of one and the same word. The verbal presentations which accompany and support my silent thinking sometimes involve picturings of words spoken by my own voice, sometimes of letters written by me in shorthand or longhand. All these are individual peculiarities, and belong merely to the psychological content of my presentational experience. Among contents in this psychological sense are also many differences in respect of act character, not always easily seized descriptively, such as the subjective difference which constitutes reference or understanding. If I hear the name Bismarck, it makes not the slightest difference to my understanding of the word's unified meaning, whether I imagine the great man in a felt hat or coat, or in a cuirassier's uniform, or whatever pictorial representation I may adopt. It is not even of importance whether any imagery serves to illustrate my consciousness of meaning, or to enliven it less directly. Battling against a seductive notion, we laid it down that the essence of expression lies in a meaning intention, and not in the more or less perfect, more or less close or remote, illustration that accompanies or fulfills that intention. If, however, such illustrations are present, they will be intimately fused with the meaning intention. It is therefore understandable that our unified experience of the meaningfully functioning expression should, from case to case, reveal considerable psychological differences even on the meaning side, whereas its meaning remains strictly the same. We have also shown that there is something in the correlated acts which really corresponds to such self-sameness of meaning, that what we call a meaning intention is not an undifferentiated character to which a connection with fulfilling intuitions first imparts an external differentiation. Meaning intentions of intrinsically different character belong rather with differing meanings, or with expressions used with differing meanings, whereas all expressions understood with like sense are clothed with the same meaning intention as an invariant mental character. Through this character, expressive experiences strongly differing in psychological makeup first become experiences endowed with the same meaning. Fluctuation of meaning here certainly involves restrictions which make no essential difference. 31. The act character of meaning and the ideally unified meaning. We have opposed what is psychologically common to what is psychologically variable, but we have not thereby hit off the distinction we wanted to clarify, that between the psychological and logical content of our expressions and expressive acts. For the psychological content as much includes what is constant from case to case as what varies with the occasion. It is not, therefore, our doctrine that an act character which stays the same in all cases, is itself our meaning. What, for example, the statement n is a transcendental number says, what we understand when we read it, and mean when we say it, is no individual feature in our thought experience, which is merely repeated on many occasions. Such a feature is always individually different from case to case, whereas the sense of the sentence should remain identical. If we or others repeat the same sentence with like intention, each of us has his own phenomena, his own words and his own nuances of understanding. Over against this unbounded multiplicity of individual experiences, is the self-same element expressed in them all, self-same in the very strictest sense. Multiplication of persons and acts does not multiply propositional meanings, the judgment in the ideal, logical sense remains single. That we here insist on the strict identity of what is meant, and oppose it to the constant mental character of meaning it, does not spring from our personal fondness for subtle distinctions, but from the firm theoretical belief that so alone can we do justice to a fact fundamental for the understanding of logic. We are not here dealing with a mere hypothesis, justifiable only by explanatory fruitfulness. We are appealing to an immediately graspable truth, following in this the self-evidence which is the final authority in all questions of knowledge. I see that in repeated acts of presentation and judgment I mean, or can mean, the same concept or proposition. I see that, wherever there is talk of the proposition or truth that n is a transcendental number, there is nothing I have less in mind than an individual experience, or a feature of an individual experience of any person. I see that such reflective talk really has as its object what serves as a meaning in straightforward talk. I see lastly that what I mean by the sentence in question or, when I hear it, grasp as its meaning, is the same thing, whether I think and exist or not, and whether or not there are any thinking persons and acts. The same holds of all types of meanings, subject meanings, predicate meanings, relational and combinatory meanings etc. It holds, above all, in the case of the ideal properties which pertain primarily to meanings. Here belong, to mention a few only of the most important, the predicates true and false, possible and impossible, general and singular, determinate and indeterminate etc. The genuine identity that we here assert is none other than the identity of the species. As a species, and only as a species, can it embrace in unity, ~v~oaatviz, and as an ideal unity, the dispersed multiplicity of individual singulars. The manifold singulars for the ideal unity meaning are naturally the corresponding act moments of meaning, the meaning intentions. Meaning is related to varied acts of meaning, logical presentation to presentative acts, logical judgment to acts of judging, logical syllogism to acts of syllogism, just as redness in specie is to the slips of paper which lie here, and which all have the same redness. Each slip has, in addition to other constitutive aspects, extension, form etc., its own individual redness, i.e. its instance of this color species, though this neither exists in the slip nor anywhere else in the whole world, and particularly not in our thought, insofar as this latter is part of the domain of real being, the sphere of temporality. Meanings constitute, we may say further, a class of concepts in the sense of universal objects. They are not for that reason objects which, though existing nowhere in the world, have being in 86 numbers of 6v1os or in a divine mind, for such metaphysical hypostatization would be absurd. If one has accustomed oneself to understand by being only real being, and by objects only real objects, then talk of universal objects and of their being may well seem basically wrong. No offense will, however, be given to one who has first used such talk merely to assert the validity of certain judgments, such in fact as concern numbers, propositions, geometrical forms etc., and who now asks whether he is not evidently obliged, here as elsewhere, to affix the label genuinely existent object to the correlate of his judgment's validity, to what it judges about. In sober truth, the 7 regular solids are, logically speaking, 7 objects precisely as the 7 sages are. The principle of the parallelogram of forces is as much a single object as the city of Paris. 32. The ideality of meanings is no ideality in the normative sense. The ideality of meanings is a particular case of the ideality of what is specific in general. It has not the sense of normative ideality, as if we were here dealing with an ideal of perfection, an ideal limiting value, over against particular cases which realized it more or less approximately. No doubt the logical concept, i.e. the term in the sense of normative logic, is an ideal in respect of its meaning. For the demand of the craft of knowledge runs, use words with an absolutely self-same meaning, exclude all meaning variations. Distinguish meanings and keep them distinct in declarative thought, and employ sharply distinct sensible signs. This prescription relates, however, as it only can relate, to the formation of meaningful terms, to care in the subjective sifting out and expression of one's thoughts. Meanings in themselves are, as we have argued, specific unities. However much the act of meaning may vary, they themselves are not ideals. Ideality in the ordinary, normative sense does not exclude reality. An ideal is a concrete original that may exist, and that may confront one in reality, as when a young artist takes the work of a great master as the ideal that he relives and that he strives after in his own creations. Even where an ideal is not realizable, it is at least an individual in our presentative intention. The ideality of what is specific is, contrariwise, the complete opposite of reality or individuality. It represents no end of possible endeavor. Its ideality lies in a unity in multiplicity. Not the species itself, but the individual falling under it, can be a practical ideal. 33. The concepts meaning and concept, in the sense of species, do not coincide. Meanings, we said, constitute a class of universal objects or species. Each species, if we wish to speak of it, presupposes a meaning, in which it is presented, and this meaning is itself a species. But the meaning in which an object is thought, and its object, the species itself, are not one and the same. Just as in the sphere of individuals, we distinguish, for example, between Bismarck himself and presentations of Bismarck, for example Bismarck, the greatest of German statesmen etc., so also, in the field of species, we distinguish between, for example, the number 4 itself and the presentations, i.e. meanings, which have 4 as their object, as, for example, the number 4, the second even number in the number series etc. The universality that we think of, does not therefore resolve itself into the universality of the meanings in which we think of it. Meanings, although as such they are universal objects, fall, in respect of the objects to which they refer, into individual and specific meanings, or, to conform to a readily understandable linguistic preference, into individual and general meanings. Individual presentations, for example, are therefore generalia, qua unities of meaning, though their objects are individualia. 34. In the act of meaning we are not conscious of meaning as an object. In the actual experience of meaning an individual feature, a singular case of the species, we said, corresponds to the unitary meaning, just as to the specific difference redness the aspect of red in the object corresponds. If we perform the act and live in it, as it were, we naturally refer to its object and not to its meaning. If, for example, we make a statement, we judge about the thing it concerns, and not about the statement's meaning, about the judgment in the logical sense. This latter first becomes objective to us in a reflex act of thought, in which we not only look back on the statement just made, but carry out the abstraction, the ideation, demanded. This logical reflection is not an act that takes place only under exceptional, artificial conditions, it is a normal component of logical thinking. What is characteristic of such thought is the context of theory, and the theoretical consideration of the latter, which is carried out in step-by-step reflections on the contents of the thought acts just performed. A very common form of thoughtful pondering may serve as an instance, is SP. That could very well be. But from this proposition it would follow that miss the case. This cannot be, and so what I first thought possible, that S is P, must be false etc. The italicized words should be noted, as well as the idealizations they express. This proposition, that S is P, which is the pervasive theme of discussion, is plainly not the fleeting moment of meaning in the thought act in which the notion first occurred to us. Logical reflection rather sets in at later stages, and an identical propositional meaning is continuously meant in it, idealized and identified in our unified thought context, and thought of as one and the same. The same is the case wherever a unified theoretical demonstration is being wound up. We could utter no therefore unless there was also a glance at the meaning content of the premises. In judging the premises, we not merely live in our judgments, but reflect on their contents. Only by glancing back at these does the conclusion appear motivated. Thus and only thus can the logical form of the premises, which of course is not stressed in that universal, conceptual way that finds expression in syllogistic formulae, determine with insight the drawing of the conclusion. 35. Meanings in themselves and meanings expressed. We have so far preferred to speak of meanings which, as the normal, relational sense of the word suggests, are meanings of expressions. There is, however, no intrinsic connection between the ideal unities which in fact operate as meanings, and the signs to which they are tied, i.e. through which they become real in human mental life. We cannot therefore say that all ideal unities of this sort are expressed meanings. Wherever a new concept is formed, we see how a meaning becomes realized that was previously unrealized. As numbers, in the ideal sense that arithmetic presupposes, neither spring forth nor vanish with the act of enumeration, and as the endless number series thus represents an objectively fixed set of general objects, sharply delimited by an ideal law, which no one can either add to or take away from, so it is with the ideal unities of pure logic, with its concepts, propositions, truths, or in other words, with its meanings. They are an ideally closed set of general objects, to which being thought or being expressed are alike contingent. There are therefore countless meanings which, in the common, relational sense, are merely possible ones, since they are never expressed, and since they can, owing to the limits of man's cognitive powers, never be expressed.